The theater smelled of varnish, old velvet, and ambition. I was Seraphine, the director, threading my way through the crowd during intermission, making sure every actor hit their mark and every cue remained flawless. The play was my life. Every line, every gesture, every flicker of light reflected my obsession with precision. Tonight, though, there was something unshakable in the pit of my stomach, a tremor of unease I couldn't ignore. I moved toward Alistair's private dressing room. The door was slightly ajar, and something about the light spilling through the crack made me pause. Through the slit, I caught a glimpse of the reflection in the mirror. Alistair pressed close to Celeste, his hands fumbling. Their lips barely brushed, but the intensity of their argument, the heat of their faces, the desperate flurry of Celeste's hands, it all felt wrong, profoundly wrong. And then my eyes fell on the tea. The very same tea I had been coaxed into drinking before the performance. Time slowed. I could feel the words but not speak them. I could see Alistair looking at me through the mirror's reflection, panic and cruelty tangled in his gaze. His mouth moved, but I only heard the echo in my own head. The play belongs to her. Your vision is gone. I tried to move, to shake off the weakness flooding through my limbs. My hands trembled over the script I had been clutching, the notes I had labored over for months, now meaningless. Celeste's eyes flicked toward me once, calculating, then back to Alistair. Their collusion was seamless, rehearsed, deliberate. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was professional, existential. Everything I had built, every careful choice, every late night, every rehearsed scene, they had already taken it, rewritten it in their image, without me. The tease effect hit me like a wave, and my vision blurred. The costumes, the sets, even the crowd's applause in the distance dissolved into a haze. I was weightless, suspended between shock and paralysis, watching my life slip like sand through my fingers. The scent of stage dust mixed with perfume, and I realized with grim clarity, I would not leave this theater alive in the way I had imagined. My final memory before the darkness claimed me was the cold, calculating gaze of Alistair and the smug satisfaction on Celeste's face. And yet, in the back of my mind, a promise burned. I would not be silenced. Even if I could not walk away from this room, even if my body failed me, my spirit, my vision, would survive. I would ensure that the theater they sought to exploit would crumble under the weight of their greed and incompetence. I would make them pay, not with violence, but with the truth, with the exposure of every shortcut, every deception. As the darkness crept over my senses, I imagined a stage without chaos, without betrayal. A stage where every line held integrity, where every actor was safe, where the lights illuminated beauty, not lies. Somewhere in the future, somehow, I would reclaim the theater. And when that day came, the applause would not be for them. It would be mine, earned, honest, and untainted. Somewhere beyond this first act of treachery, I could see him, Julian. Calm, meticulous, loyal beyond reason. He would be my partner in rebuilding the world they had tried to destroy. My trust in him was already a seed planted, ready to grow. The theater could survive, and so could I, if only I could wake, if only I could take that first step back. And then, finally, I slipped away from the poison stage, the last echo of applause fading behind me. I woke up to the scent of dust, old velvet, and polished wood. The faint hum of a rehearsal drifted through the university theater, echoing off the high ceilings and empty seats. I was 18 again, long before Alistair, before Celeste, before betrayal had marred the boards I loved. My hands rested on the worn edges of the stage, and for a moment, I simply breathed. I had been given a second chance, and this time, I would not squander it. The theater felt alive in a way it never had before. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of light from the ceiling fixtures whispered possibility. I knew every line of dialogue, every cue, every dangerous shortcut that would later lead to disaster. And now I could prevent it. My focus immediately fell on Julian, the stage manager. He moved among the rigging and lights with calm authority, adjusting, measuring, watching, the kind of meticulous precision that few appreciated, but I could see. Even then, I sensed his loyalty, his ethical backbone. I knew he would be my anchor. I approached him quietly, careful not to interrupt the rhythm of his work. There was no need for dramatic gestures, no need for speeches. I simply conveyed the urgency of the future in my gaze and in the way I lingered near the upstage truss, pointing out subtle shifts in weight that would later become catastrophic. Julian paused, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully, then nodded almost imperceptibly. There was trust in that gesture, and it steadied me. The rehearsal continued around us, the actors unaware of the invisible danger above them. I studied Julian as he moved, his hands deftly adjusting lights, ropes, and pulleys, every motion precise. I had never realized how grounding it could be to be near someone so steady. His quiet competence created a bubble around us, a fragile sanctuary amid the chaos that would one day threaten the stage. In the breaks, we lingered near the edge of the stage, our shoulders brushing as we examined a set piece or discussed subtle movements. The contact was small, almost incidental, but each brush of his hand sent a warmth through me I hadn't anticipated. There was an intimacy in shared purpose, a tension that built slowly, like a melody rising in a composition. I found myself lingering a moment longer than necessary, offering a subtle smile when he glanced at me, catching a flicker of something unspoken in his eyes. Every rehearsal was an exercise in anticipation. I could see the disasters that would unfold, the shortcuts Alistair would take, the reckless choices Celeste would make. Julian didn't need my warnings in words. He absorbed them, translating them into action with unwavering dedication. And with each intervention, each adjustment, the bond between us deepened, unspoken but undeniable. Late one evening, after the rehearsal had ended and the theater had fallen into near silence, I lingered near the rigging, watching Julian secure the final lights. Our hands brushed again, lingering longer this time. The warmth of his skin against mine was grounding, a reminder that this world, this second chance, was real. He looked at me then, and for a heartbeat, the noise of the theater, the threat of betrayal, everything that had haunted me faded. "Careful," he said softly, though it was more a whisper than a warning. His thumb grazed my hand, deliberate, grounding. The touch was small, intimate, but it spoke volumes, a promise of protection, a connection deeper than words. I felt a shiver, not of fear, but of anticipation. In that moment, I realized the theater was no longer a place of fear or betrayal. It had become a stage for something entirely new, a partnership built on trust, precision, and the thrill of growing intimacy. And somewhere in that quiet, dimly lit theater, I allowed myself to imagine a future where Julian's hand remained in mine, steadying me through every act, every scene, every challenge. For the first time in my life, I was ready to step onto that stage not just as a director, but as someone who could finally trust. And maybe, just maybe, the heart could follow the hands that kept me safe. The morning light filtered through the tall, dusty windows of the theater, painting gold streaks across the polished floorboards. I moved deliberately among the props and set pieces, tracing each seam, each bolt, each hinge that would later decide the safety of the actors. Every corner, every shadow whispered reminders of what could go wrong: the flimsy rigging, the hastily installed platforms, the subtle errors in weight distribution. And I knew Julian would be my anchor through it all. He arrived just after sunrise, carrying his toolkit, his hands steady, his gaze calm and focused. Watching him move, I was struck by the contrast between his quiet competence and the chaos that would inevitably erupt around us. I stayed close, lingering under the pretense of observing the set, but my heart kept inching nearer to him. Every glance he shot me, every subtle nod, spoke volumes. I had never been so aware of the pull of another person in a room that was meant for nothing but architecture and rehearsal. The rehearsal began in earnest. Actors moved, scripts clutched in hand, stepping over cables and rehearsing lines, blissfully unaware of the perils overhead. I followed Julian's movements like a shadow, noting where he adjusted a truss or tightened a loose rope. My hand brushed his as we reached for the same piece of lighting hardware. It was brief, almost accidental, but my pulse leapt at the contact. He didn't recoil. He lingered just a moment longer than necessary, and I felt a warmth spread through me, a small flame in the midst of tension. As we worked, I felt the magnetic pull of shared purpose. Julian's presence was grounding. I could focus on every risk, every potential disaster because he was there, moving in synchrony with me, anticipating the needs of the theater before I even voiced them. There was trust in his precision, trust that ran deeper than words could articulate. And with that trust came something else, the subtle dance of unspoken desire, the kind that lingered in fingertips brushing over steel beams and the warmth of a hand resting lightly on a shoulder. During a break, I found myself sitting on the edge of the stage, watching him calibrate the lights. I leaned back slightly, stretching, and he crouched beside me, adjusting a fixture. Our knees touched. It was accidental, but the closeness was electric. I caught the faintest shift in his posture, the almost imperceptible pause before he moved again. I dared a smile, and he returned it, small, quiet, teasing. There was flirtation in the simplicity of it, in the unspoken acknowledgement of our shared awareness. The rehearsal picked up pace, and so did our subtle intimacy. Our hands met again as we hoisted a backdrop into place. This time, we didn't pull away. Our eyes met, lingering, a charged silence stretching between us. The theater faded into the background, the sound of footsteps, the rustle of scripts, the faint hum of rehearsal music. All of it vanished until it was just him and me, moving together in a rhythm older than words, a rhythm I had never realized I craved. By the time the rehearsal ended, my arms ached from work, my heart raced from the closeness we had shared. Julian lingered by the exit, and I found myself walking toward him, drawn by something I could no longer ignore. His hand brushed mine as he handed me a set of rehearsal notes. The touch lingered, deliberate this time. My breath caught. He looked at me, eyes soft, steady, warm, and unguarded. I felt the tension in my chest melt in the presence of his quiet protection. "Careful, Seraphine," he murmured, the words low, intimate, carrying a weight that made my pulse spike. The proximity, the heat, the trust, it all converged in a single, potent moment. And in the dim light of the theater, with shadows stretching across the stage, I felt an undeniable pull. My heart leaned toward him, and my hand lingered against his for just a heartbeat too long, as if I were daring him to notice. It was a promise of something unspoken, a foreshadowing of moments yet to come, a connection forged in whispered glances, subtle touches, and the shared thrill of protecting what we loved. And I knew, with an unshakable certainty, that the theater was no longer just my world of artistry and risk. It had become the space where something far more personal and profound could flourish. The theater smelled of varnish and dust, a mix of warmth and history that never failed to stir something in me. I moved through the empty rows of seats, fingertips grazing the velvet cushions, listening to the echo of my own steps. The space felt alive, almost breathing, like it remembered every rehearsal, every whispered argument, every quiet triumph. And in the quiet corners of that living theater, Julian's presence felt impossibly close, even when he wasn't in the room. Today was critical. Alistair had begun to push his influence early, whispering promises and threats to the cast, plotting the same chaotic path that had destroyed my vision in the past. Every corner I turned, I felt the weight of his manipulation, his desire to control the stage, the actors, and even me. I couldn't allow it. Not this time. Not with everything we had worked for hanging in the balance. Julian was already there, crouched under the proscenium arch, hands steady as he adjusted rigging bolts with the precision of someone who understood that the smallest miscalculation could lead to disaster. His quiet focus grounded me. I approached slowly, deliberately, leaning over to inspect a loose cable. Our hands met again as we worked together, a deliberate brush that sent an unexpected thrill up my arm. I didn't pull away. Neither did he. "Careful," Julian murmured, his breath close to my ear. The words weren't a warning. They were something else, something unspoken that made my chest tighten. I felt the warmth of him, the subtle electricity in the contact, and I realized that this partnership had shifted. It wasn't just safety and strategy anymore. There was an undercurrent of something tender, something electric, that neither of us could deny. Alistair's name loomed over everything, a constant shadow I had to navigate. But with Julian, there was no shadow, only clarity. His eyes met mine briefly as we moved a heavy piece of set equipment together. The touch of his hands, the accidental brush of our shoulders, lingered just long enough to make me aware of every heartbeat, every breath. I caught myself stealing glances, craving more than professional proximity. And Julian's occasional smiles, the way he let his hand linger on a railing as I passed, made it impossible to ignore the tension building between us. We paused mid-rehearsal, the cast off stage, the theater eerily still. Julian adjusted a lighting fixture while I leaned against the scaffolding, watching him work. The closeness, the rhythm of our movements, the shared understanding of risk, it was intoxicating. My fingers itched to reach out, to touch his arm, his hand, and feel the warmth of him fully. When our hands brushed again as we shifted a heavy prop, I let my palm linger, feeling the subtle heat, the deliberate steadiness in his response. "Seraphine," he said softly, almost reverently, as our eyes met. There was no pretense in his gaze, no hint of mockery or impatience. Just focus, care, and an intimacy that made my pulse race. I felt the pull of him, the unspoken promise that he was there, not just to protect the theater or the production, but me. I leaned just slightly closer, enough that our breaths mingled in the still air. The rehearsal ended, the cast filing out and leaving us alone with the quiet hum of the empty theater. Julian lingered, just behind me, steady and unyielding. I could feel the proximity, the magnetic tension that had grown over hours of shared work and subtle touches. When he finally spoke, it was soft, almost hesitant, but charged. "You've been holding too much on your own," he said. His hand brushed against mine, not accidental this time. Firm, deliberate. Warm. I turned slightly, allowing the contact to linger. His eyes searched mine, calm yet penetrating, as though asking permission without words. I answered with a small, almost imperceptible nod, letting the silence speak. And then, in the quiet aftermath of our work, with the theater empty and the shadows stretching across the stage, Julian leaned in. His lips met mine in a kiss that was slow, deliberate, and unhurried, a kiss that carried all the trust, tension, and unspoken longing that had been building between us. My heart leapt, my chest tightened, and for the first time, I let myself feel the safety, warmth, and promise of him. It was more than a kiss. It was the beginning of a partnership that wasn't just about safety or survival. It was about connection, trust, and a love that had been waiting in the wings all along. The theater never slept, not really. Even in the quiet hours, the echoes of rehearsals, whispered directions, and creaking floorboards lingered like ghosts. Tonight, I moved carefully among the shadows, my heels silent against the polished wood, heart still racing from the kiss Julian had pressed to my lips yesterday. The warmth lingered, like a flame hidden in the dark, impossible to ignore. Alistair was scheming, of course. I could feel it in the air, the tension of a predator circling a prize. He had begun rearranging stage schedules, rerouting set pieces, and whispering behind closed doors. His ambition was as suffocating as ever, but this time I had Julian, and that made the theater feel like something more than just a battleground. Julian was already at the stage, crouched low as he inspected the rigging. His presence always drew me in, a gravitational pull I couldn't resist. Every subtle gesture, the way his hands moved with purpose, the quiet authority in his gaze, the slight curve of his lips when he noticed me, made my pulse quicken. I had learned, slowly, that our touches were deliberate, loaded with meaning, and each brush of skin sent a thrill through me. I knelt beside him to inspect a set piece. Our knees touched, deliberately close, and I felt the tension coil between us. He didn't pull away. Instead, he let his hand brush mine, lingering just long enough to make my fingers tingle. The small contact was electric, more intimate than any words could ever be. His eyes met mine, warm and steady, and I realized that every glance, every touch, every shared heartbeat was a silent conversation. Alistair had underestimated Julian's vigilance. Every trap, every sabotage attempt he laid, Julian found and corrected before it could endanger anyone. I watched him maneuver through the theater with quiet authority, his focus absolute, yet I couldn't help but notice the small, personal ways he reached for me, brushing my shoulder as he guided me away from a precarious prop, adjusting my coat with a tender precision, or letting our hands linger on a railing as we passed. I laughed quietly to myself, knowing the cast and crew would never understand the undercurrent of energy between us. The flirtation was subtle, almost a game. A touch here, a look there, a fleeting closeness that sent heat to my cheeks. Julian had a way of making the ordinary moments, adjusting lights, moving set pieces, even walking side by side, feel profoundly intimate. The rehearsal ended, and the theater grew quiet. The glow of the stage lights softened the shadows, creating a cocoon around us. Julian stayed close, never letting the distance between us stretch too far. He reached for my hand, not in the mechanical way of stage work, but with intention. I turned toward him, feeling the steady heat of his palm against mine. "You've been carrying too much," he said softly, the corner of his mouth tilting in a small, reassuring smile. His gaze held mine, unyielding, grounding. I felt the flutter in my chest, the same electric thrill as yesterday, but magnified. This was no longer just a connection. It was a promise, a growing intimacy that neither of us could ignore. I leaned slightly toward him, letting our foreheads almost touch, and he closed the distance. His hand cupped my cheek, thumb brushing lightly across my skin. I inhaled the faint scent of him, wood smoke, leather, and something undeniably Julian. The kiss that followed was slow, deliberate, teasing at first, then deepening with the unspoken desire that had been building for weeks. My arms curved around him instinctively, pulling him closer as the theater around us faded into nothing. When we finally parted, breathless, I rested my forehead against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "We're going to protect this theater," I whispered, "and each other." Julian tightened his embrace. "Always," he murmured, his lips brushing the top of my head. And for the first time in months, I believed him. The theater smelled of dust and varnish, a familiar, grounding scent that reminded me why I had chosen this life. But tonight, the familiar was layered with tension. Alistair had been maneuvering behind the scenes again, whispering threats to suppliers, shifting rehearsal times, and hinting at impossible set changes. He thought he could throw us off balance. He hadn't counted on Julian. Julian was already at the center of the stage, adjusting a prop with meticulous care. Every movement he made was deliberate, precise, a dance of skill and authority. I watched him, my pulse quickening, not from fear of Alistair's schemes but from the subtle, magnetic pull Julian always had on me. He noticed me out of the corner of his eye and gave a small nod, just enough to make my heart skip. I joined him, kneeling to examine the base of a precarious set piece. Our knees brushed, an almost accidental contact that lingered a heartbeat too long. I felt that familiar warmth spread through me. Julian didn't pull away. Instead, his hand shifted slightly, just barely touching mine as he adjusted a bolt. That fleeting contact made the tension between us crackle, electric and undeniable. "Careful," he murmured, his voice low, almost intimate. The way he said it made my stomach flip. It wasn't a warning about the set. It was a warning about how close we were. I smiled, letting my hand linger just a moment longer on his, teasing, testing. He didn't flinch. He didn't pull back. He met my gaze with a steady, unspoken intensity that made the room around us vanish. Alistair's shadow was never far. I could feel his manipulations looming, yet Julian's presence created a sanctuary. The small, shared moments, the brush of hands as we passed props, the gentle guidance across the stage, were charged. Each subtle touch, each glance, carried an unspoken promise. I realized how much I craved these moments, how much I needed the quiet intensity of Julian's loyalty and strength. We moved together through the theater, checking every corner, every rigging, every potential trap Alistair might have left. It was a silent, shared choreography, and with every step, the tension between us grew. My fingers brushed his arm, his hand stayed close to mine, and we lingered near each other just a second too long at every turn. It was a delicate game, one of flirtation and unspoken desire, and I felt alive in a way I hadn't in months. Later, after the rehearsal, Julian leaned against the wings, watching me straighten a set piece. I approached, letting my fingers graze his shoulder as I passed. He caught my wrist lightly, his touch deliberate and teasing, pulling me just slightly closer than necessary. I looked up at him, our faces inches apart, and the air between us seemed to hum with electricity. "You're always so careful," he whispered, his breath warm against my skin. "Even with me." I smirked, letting my fingers trail lightly over his hand. "Maybe I just like having someone watch my back," I replied softly, letting the teasing linger in my tone. Julian's eyes darkened with something deeper, admiration, desire, something I was beginning to understand as intimacy. Before I could think too much, he leaned in, pressing a gentle, deliberate kiss to my lips. It was soft at first, exploratory, a question and an answer all at once. My breath caught, and I let myself respond, tilting into him. The kiss deepened, long and slow, filled with a silent trust and growing connection that had been building for weeks. His hands held me steady, grounding me amidst the chaos of the theater and the danger of Alistair's schemes. When we finally parted, I rested my forehead against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the calm in the storm. "We'll get through him," I whispered. Julian tightened his arms around me. "Always," he murmured, his lips brushing my temple. And in that moment, I believed him more than ever. Every corner seemed to whisper of Alistair's interference, the sabotaged rigging, the misplaced props, the subtle, malicious changes only someone with insider knowledge could have made. But tonight, I wasn't afraid. Tonight, Julian was with me, and somehow, that made the chaos bearable. We moved together through the backstage labyrinth, our steps synchronized, almost instinctively. Julian had a quiet authority, one that commanded respect without ever raising his voice. I followed him closely, feeling the warmth of his presence like a shield against Alistair's machinations. Each time our hands brushed as we adjusted a piece of scenery, I felt a thrill, a mixture of professional urgency and something far more intimate. "You're overthinking the angle of that prop," Julian murmured, leaning close to adjust it. His chest brushed mine, subtle but undeniable, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I smiled without looking up, letting the brush of his hand linger just a moment longer than necessary. He caught my gaze, and there it was, the same intensity that had kept me awake nights before rehearsals. That unspoken connection had grown stronger, bolder, demanding acknowledgement. "You always make it look easy," he said softly, a teasing lilt in his voice. My lips twitched. "I could say the same about you," I replied, letting my fingers trace lightly along his arm as I passed him. He didn't flinch. Instead, his hand followed mine for just a heartbeat longer, a silent affirmation of the tension between us. Alistair's shadow loomed somewhere nearby, but Julian's presence was an anchor. We moved from set to set, carefully inspecting each piece for potential sabotage. Every accidental touch, every fleeting brush, carried an energy that neither of us could, or wanted to, ignore. The theater, usually a place of discipline and order, felt charged with something new, flirtation, closeness, a bond that had nothing to do with the stage itself. Later, in the quiet of the wings after a particularly tense rehearsal, I found myself standing closer to Julian than I had intended. The silence stretched between us, comfortable yet heavy with anticipation. I let my hand graze his as we both adjusted a dangling set piece, the contact deliberate, teasing. He responded instinctively, holding my hand with a warmth that made my chest ache. You know, he said, voice low, I've been waiting for a moment like this. I tilted my head, curiosity and longing mixing in my expression. A moment like what? I asked, though my heartbeat betrayed me. He smiled, a slow, knowing curve of his lips. A moment where nothing else matters, just you and me. His fingers brushed against mine again, this time intentionally, and I felt a spark that set my nerves alight. I stepped closer, closing the distance, letting my hands rest lightly on his shoulders. He responded, bringing his hands to my waist, steadying me as though to say, without words, that he was here and he wouldn't let go. The theater around us faded, the lights, the chaos, Alistair's schemes, and all that existed was the closeness between us, the shared heartbeat of trust and longing. Julian leaned in, brushing his lips against mine in a tentative, gentle kiss. I caught my breath, letting the kiss deepen, letting my hands thread into his hair. The world had narrowed to that single, perfect connection, two people finding solace, passion, and certainty in each other amidst the storm. When we finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine, his chest rising and falling in time with mine. We're going to make it through this, he whispered, voice husky with emotion. Yes, I murmured, feeling the certainty settle over me. Together. The danger of Alistair's sabotage hadn't disappeared, but in that moment, it didn't matter. Julian's touch, his loyalty, his unwavering presence, made me stronger, braver, and more determined than ever. We would face the final act together, hearts entwined, ready for whatever came next. The theater smelled of varnish, fresh paint, and faint traces of stage dust, familiar, grounding scents that had once been overshadowed by Alistair's manipulations. But tonight, everything felt different. I was Seraphine, director and survivor, standing at the heart of the stage I had built with sweat, foresight, and unwavering ethics. Julian was beside me, a quiet presence that made the chaos of the final preparations manageable, even comforting. We moved through the wings like a well-rehearsed duet. Every glance we shared, every touch as our hands passed over props or set pieces, carried the weight of weeks spent navigating sabotage, betrayal, and stolen opportunities. But now, there was no fear, only trust, admiration, and something undeniably tender simmering between us. The final dress rehearsal began, and I watched from the sidelines as the cast moved flawlessly under Julian's meticulous oversight. Each set piece held firm. The lighting cues were perfect, and the actors flowed across the stage with a confidence that only comes from safety and preparation. I allowed myself a small, victorious smile. Julian caught it, returning it with a subtle lift of his eyebrows that made my chest tighten with unspoken promise. After the curtain call, the quiet of the empty theater enveloped us. The echoes of applause from rehearsals and previews seemed to linger in the air, but they were nothing compared to the beating of our own hearts. I stepped closer to Julian, letting my fingers brush against his. He responded, pressing his palm lightly against mine, grounding me. You did it, he said softly, his eyes dark with emotion. We did it. We did, I murmured, feeling the truth of it in every fiber of my being. Together. We moved toward the center of the stage, our private moment in the vast, empty space. Julian's hands found my waist, steadying me, while mine rested lightly on his chest. His warmth radiated through me, a shield against every betrayal, every fear that had haunted the last months. I kept thinking, he said quietly, leaning in, that no one could ever truly understand the chaos of this place, but you make it feel alive in the right way. Safe. Real. I tilted my head, our foreheads touching, and smiled softly. And you make me feel that even when everything falls apart, someone has my back. Always. The air thickened with anticipation, a slow, deliberate tension that had built through every shared glance, every brush of skin. Julian leaned in closer, his lips hovering over mine. I could feel the warmth, the steady pulse, the promise in his touch. Then, with perfect certainty, he kissed me, soft at first, testing the waters, then deepening with an honesty that took my breath away. My arms wrapped around him instinctively, pulling him closer, anchoring us both in this moment of triumph and relief. The kiss lingered, unhurried, a tangible acknowledgement of shared trust, hard-won victories, and a future no longer shadowed by Alistair's deceit. When we finally pulled apart, we rested our foreheads together, breathing in the same air, hearts beating in tandem. The theater around us no longer felt like a battleground. It was home, our home. "Let's never let anyone undermine this again," Julian whispered, a quiet vow that sent a shiver of certainty down my spine. "Agreed," I replied, my hand brushing through his hair. "We run this together now. No compromises. No shortcuts." Years later, our theater company thrived. Every production, every rehearsal, every performance carried the integrity and care Julian and I had fought to protect. Alistair's schemes had crumbled under the weight of our diligence and ethics, leaving only the echoes of his betrayal as a reminder of what we had overcome. And through it all, Julian remained my constant, steady, protective, and deeply in love. Each day was a performance of trust, a duet of dedication, and the quiet intimacy of shared victory. I had traded a manipulative ex for a partner whose loyalty, love, and hands-on devotion created a life that was ours, entirely and authentically. On the stage where so much betrayal had once unfolded, I now stood in triumph, hand in hand with Julian, kissed and promised in ways deeper than any script could capture. This was the final act, not just for the play, but for my life, my heart, and the love I had earned, finally free from deceit.